and welcome to Lore Watch, roundtable freeform discussion about lore and our favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my stupendous co-host with me today, Matt Rossi. How you doing today, Matt?
Never mind me, introduce Liz.
Joining us today is our editor-in-chief, Liz Harper. How you doing today, Liz?
Howdy. I've been playing a lot of Dragon Age for some reason. I don't know why. Just
it's funny
random,
you should mention that. Funny you should mention that because we are going to be talking about Dragon Age. Well, if you listened to the previous episode, or the previous Dragon Age episode, congratulations, welcome back. You found us again. If you didn't, go back and listen to it, and then listen to this one. We're going in reverse order. It's going to be all weird if you don't do it in that order too. We're going to be talking about. Oh, go ahead.
I will say our friend of the site, Anne Stickney, played these games in reverse order, which I still think is a little crazy, but that was how she was introduced to Dragon Age, so maybe we're just doing this in her honor.
I also think it makes a sort of weird amount of sense, right? Because if you're playing the most recent one and then going backwards, you're more likely to understand some of the weirder context. You're going to miss some things. There's some things that you are definitely going to be like, oh, I wonder where that came from. And then when you get there, be like, oh, okay. But I think, I almost want to say that I think Inquisition and Dragon Age 2, which we're going to be talking about today, do a better job of world building as far as a game first experience than Dragon Age Origin does. And that might be a controversial statement. I'm not saying that Dragon Age Origins was bad. It's just that a lot of Dragon Age Origins story existed outside of the game to set up the world. So there were 2 books written by David Gator, as well as a comic book set as well that were released. And all of those had a lot of world building that sort of piled on top of it. And then when we moved into Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition, the game was more standing on its own 2 feet and gave you a lot more of the story contained within it versus having to go and read, like, you know, the Dark Roads or whatever. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about Dragon Age 2, which is often maligned. It's people like to poop on it a lot, and I'm not sure.
People don't like caves if it's the same cave over and over again.
Except here, I think Dragon Age 2 is the best game in the series. I love Dragon Age 2. Yeah,
Dragon Age 2 is the best one.
This is your Dragon Age 2 fans right here.
But I also agree, and I think that part of the problem was, and Matt kind of hit the nail on the head, before we go into the story stuff, and I'm going to let these two talk because they've definitely played more recently than I have, but I think that was one of the harshest criticisms, and I can understand that criticism, is that you saw the same environment repeatedly, and it made sense in terms of the story and what was going on with it, but from a gameplay standpoint, if you were just playing the game, it's very easy to get tired of doing the same thing over and over and over again, even if it's slightly different. I don't think that it takes away from the rest of the game. I think that the rest of the game is phenomenal despite having that one little environmental faux pas. But then again, I look at Dragon Age Origins and it was a lot of the same environment too. When you're in the Dark Roads are the Dark Roads, right? Like you might get some dwarven architecture, the Deep Roads. You might get some dwarven architecture here and there, but for the most part, it's, you know, a darkspawn breeding ground, right? Like it's the same. So I think that the criticism was unduly harsh. But that said, I mean, which of you wants to start taking us to the wonderful opening sequence of Dragon Age 2?
Liz, you want to go or you want me to?
I'll kick it off and then you can jump in. I love the story framing of Dragon Age 2. I think you play Dragon Age 2 for the story. The gameplay is maybe not as interesting. The settings are not as interesting because they are very samey. But you're here for the story, which Dragon Age 2 does a better job of telling a distinct, focused story than any of the other games for a reason. Because you are a specific character. You are Hawke. And you're fleeing from the Blight in Ferelden, which in Dragon Age Origins is all about the Blight in Ferelden. You are fleeing that and you're heading to Kirkwall, which was just a terrible idea. Turns out, terrible idea. But the game is all framed along this idea of Varric telling this as a story later to Cassandra, who we will see in Dragon Age Inquisition. And I think it's very artfully put together, the way they've framed out this game. And even some of the scenes that you see in the game, it's like you're coming from an unreliable narrator. Mm-hmm. So you're playing out the scenes as Hawk, but sometimes you jump back to Varric and Cassandra saying that definitely didn't happen. And Varric's like, well, maybe.
I think there's an excellent bit of visual shorthand in this for that. If you are playing as a warrior or rogue Hawk, that means Bethany, your sister, is your companion in the intro when Varric is first telling the story. She's there's no gentle way to say this. She's like 2 cup sizes larger than she actually is. Just, and you later on you realize Varric is just really drawing attention to that. It's like, why are you doing this, Varric? Like, and it just, you get Cassandra looking at him, and it's just this moment of just demonstrating you cannot trust everything this man says. Mm-hmm. He might not be a liar exactly, but his relationship to the truth is like a surfer's relationship to waves. He's not trying to get down into there and care about the truth. He is just trying to ride to the next wave. If he needs to throw some verbal shorthand in there, he'll absolutely do it. If he thinks it just will be more interesting if everybody thinks Bethany's hot, he will try and make Bethany hot, and he doesn't have any shame or even really any concern about it. And it's just a really good way to establish it very fast. You don't have to have people telling you, oh, you can't trust Varric. He literally just shows you.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, because this is just the prologue. We're not even in Act 1 yet, right? Yeah. Like you get in, you have Varric talking to Cassandra, who tells the story, and this is very clearly Cassandra asks for the story of the champion of Kirkwall. So kind of already tells you what sort of maybe is going to happen. It starts with a high stress scenario, like you just said, fleeing from the Darkspawn, trying to escape Lothering, and then trying to get to Kirkwall because that's where Hawk's mother was born. The whole linking up with Wesley, who is an injured, I believe, Templar, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, yes. Sir Wesley.
Yeah, to try to get your chances of getting to Kirkwall improved.
Wesley and Aveline. Actually.
Aveline Velen, yeah, his wife. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you basically run into, I remember the first encounter, it was wild, right? Because this is what you're talking about, that over exaggeration, because you get into that first encounter with the Darkspawn, with the ogre, right?
It's huge. It's like twice as tall as Hawk. It's
absolutely
and there's
massive.
Also like 1 million Darkspawn, and you have all these enormous powers.
Yes.
And you're blowing stuff up, and then she goes, no, I don't. You're not gonna get me to believe that a dragon showed up. No. And he's like, well, and then he cuts back to a more grounded version of the same story.
Well,
and every
kinda,
time
I just said more grounded. I'm not saying more accurate.
Every time he cuts back, it's you, the player, playing this new scenario that he is narrating. I just love how they frame this out.
Yeah, and I also like how they do the introduction to it too, because then you start to see some of the tendrils that are sort of tied into Hawk's destiny, I guess would be the best way to put it. Because that high dragon that suddenly attacks and drives off the Darkspawn lands in front of the group and shapeshifts into Flemeth, which is, essentially the woman of many years, the mother of vengeance, witch of the wilds, and very, very powerful being, and mother really of Morgan.
Yeah. But what's interesting is at the time we know Flemeth wasn't wearing that outfit, but Varric doesn't know that because he'd never seen her until he saw her the first time in Kirkwall. Mm-hmm. So Varric describes her as how she looks after she's resurrected using the ritual from the Dalish. Which is interesting to me, and I think is going to have consequences in Veilguard.
I would agree.
Let me put it this way. I think that the elven gods things in Veilguard that we've already been told are coming, that's all part of the story. I think they are much more dependent on other people's opinions of what they are than we have been led to believe.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
and in that we should
in this game, you get it. So go ahead and keep going, Liz.
in that we should probably say that we know from Dragon Age Inquisition that Plymouth is Mythal, or an incarnation of the elven god Mythal, that has survived all of these years when all of the other elven gods, most of them, have been trapped, have been turning into archdemons. So this is some piece of elven history or elven divinity that has made it through all these years and is still surviving. She asks Hawk to take this locket she hands him or her into Kirkwall, to a Dalish clan outside of Kirkwall. And the locket turns out to be a piece of her that they have carried along and smuggled her into the Free Marches because she is concerned that Morgan may take harsh action against her, and she wants to have a little bit of insurance. And if you play Dragon Age Origins, you know that's an option. Morgan can indeed kill Plymouth.
Yes.
That fails to say.
But the story then from there goes that essentially Wesley dies, succumbs to the Darkspawn taint, begs for death, essentially, from you, despite Aveline's protests, and then Varric cuts the story, right? Like, it cuts to your arrival in Kirkwall. So there's a period of time in between that's missing, that he may not know anything about, or maybe something that gets explored later. And I'm kicking it to one of you two.
Okay, I'll go. When you get to see Kirkwall for the first time, one of the things that's interesting is, again, still we're getting this narrated by Varric, but we also get visuals of the journey as we get, where we see, like, the sea's lashed by terrible storms, and there's like a little graphic appearing on a screen, and then you actually see the boat. And it's a tiny little thing. Even in Varric's description, this is not a huge galleon or anything. It's a tiny little skiff, essentially, with a cargo hold absolutely packed full of Fereldans desperate to get the heck out of there. And when they get to Kirkwall, they're immediately told that they ain't getting into Kirkwall. Like, that is the first thing people are told. Nope, we're not letting any of you into the city. The City Watch and the Templars are both working together to just keep you out. You are not getting in. Hawk, being a person of action, whoever you chose, if you chose to be a mage, your irate brother Carver is with you. If you chose to be a fighter or rogue, you have the much more personable, although again not as Varric describes her, Bethany, who I've always felt really, I'm fond of Bethany as a character. I think she's really cool because she is just, she just wants to live. She doesn't have any grand sweeping ambitions or epic schemes. She just wants to live, and to a certain degree, it's either of the siblings is interesting to watch, as they are kind of like reflections of Hawk. And by being reflections, they are mirror reversed. Like, Carver is desperate to prove himself and to forge his own path and his own way forward. Hawk does that without even trying. Bethany wants a normal life. And Hawk doesn't even know what normal is. Hawk is like, oh yeah, our old house is full of slavers. Yeah, let's go deal with that. So you get in, you talk to the guard. You're like, hey, if you can call my uncle Gamlin, he's like a noble in the city. And the guy's like, Gamlin? The only Gamlin I know is a weasel who couldn't rub two coins together, but I'll go look for him. Foreshadowing, after an extended period of time, at least a couple of days, he does show up, and Gamlin is like, Leandra, your mother, is like, oh, this has been horrible. My husband died in the plague. And he's like, Leandra, please, I don't even know if I can get you out of this courtyard. Don't dump all this on me now. He basically reveals to you that he has made a deal, and he has two possible groups you can deal with. Either you can go join a rogues alliance, a kind of like smuggling thief guild type thing. I think they're called the Red Angels, or what, the Red something.
I don't remember.
I can't remember their name. Then again, I can't remember the other group's name either.
They don't play much of a role in the long-term story. It's like, you do this or you do that.
Yeah. Basically, the point is you can join one or join the other. If you join one, you're essentially making enemies of the other, but it doesn't necessarily play into anything. Like, you don't get attacked unless you do certain specific things. But one way or the other, you join one of these two unsavory organizations for a year. You're basically an indentured servant to these people for a year, because they have to pay to grease the palms of the guards to let you into Kirkwall. They're straight up paying for you to be allowed in, and in return, you work for them for a year.
And of course, your supposedly noble family in Kirkwall has fallen far from fortune. The family home is gone, and you are all living in a little shack in Lowtown with your uncle, who is kind of grumpy about it. Not very happy to have house guests.
No, he is less than thrilled. So that's the setup. You basically say, I won't let this stop me. Q2 1 year later. And this is important because the structure of the game is basically, it's a perfect 3-act play. Like in terms of, it's got 3 acts.
Which makes sense considering it's being told by Varric, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting is the meetings of all the characters kind of resonate throughout the game. In that, like, you meet Varric, and he basically does you a good turn and then tells you that there is a way for you to solve your problems. I'm just going to go straight into what's happening. After a year, you're out of whatever, or the Red Iron, that was the name of one of them. Either the Red Iron or the other group, you're no longer working for them. You are, however, trying to make a name for yourself, because you basically have sort of made a name for yourself. People know who Hawk is at this point. After a year of working for one of the 2 criminal organizations, they don't necessarily like him, but they know, or her, but they know who they are. So now you're basically trying to get in on this expedition to the Deep Roads, because there's 2 dwarves who are trying to take advantage of the fact that the Blight's over. And essentially, there's a really important reason why this is a year later, because it's when you get to Kirkwall, the original Dragon Age Origins is actually still happening. Mm-hmm. When you get out of that 1 year of service, Dragon Age Origins Awakening has ended.
Yeah, the hero Ferelden has prevailed.
Yeah, and that means, and one of the things that means is that the Darkspawn have retreated, because they have been not just beaten once, but beaten twice by this person. And not only does the Archdemon die, but a powerful, somewhat intelligent Darkspawn called the Architect has also been defeated. It was unique in that it could talk and think and could impart that to other Darkspawn. So no one's sure what the deal with the Architect is, because the Architect doesn't remember anything about his life. But it's either it's allied with or destroyed. I think the canon is that it's destroyed. So that all happens. Then you go into this game, and you're trying to go into the Deep Roads to take advantage of the fact that most of the Darkspawn have pulled back. They've pulled back to the point where Kal Shirak, which is a dwarven city, is now in contact with Orzammar for the first time in generations. The 2 remaining dwarven cities are in touch. They don't like each other, but they are talking now, which they couldn't do before because nobody could get through. They couldn't send a messenger anywhere. Now they can. That's one example of why these 2 surface dwarves, Varric and his brother, what's his brother? Bartram. Thank you. Varric and Bartram, they don't get along with each other at all. Like, Varric is enforcing his decision to come along on this trip because if Bartram dies, that's the end of the house, essentially. Whereas Bartram does not have the same loyalty, let's say, and we'll get back to that. But they're doing this expedition. They're taking advantage of the fact that the dwarves know that the Darkspawn have retreated to go into the Deep Roads and find out what old dwarven treasures they can find now that the Darkspawn Darkspawn tide has gone out to sea, so to speak. They're taking advantage of the moment. Bartram does not want to take Hawk, because Bartram knows full well that Hawk is in this for riches, and he doesn't feel like he needs another guy like that. He's got plenty of people to be yes men and take be like grubbing for money. He doesn't listen to Hawk when Hawk's like, look, you need me. I've actually fought Darkspawn. You haven't. And he doesn't listen. But Varric interrupts somebody picking Hawk's pocket at just the absolute wrong time, where Hawk has just been sent away by Bartrand. Someone steals his purse, runs, and then gets shot with a crossbow bolt that doesn't hit him or kill him. It just pins him to the wall by his clothes. And then he just walks up to the kid and is holds his hand out until he gets the purse back. Then he knocks the kid out, takes his bolt back, and goes over and tosses Hawk his purse.
I have always wondered about that scene, whether this is another scene that Varric has made up.
I don't think,
or whether this is a scene that Varric set up in order to get Hawk's attention. I have wondered that.
I believe in my bones that you are right about the second option. That is the way.
The game does not comment in any way, but the timing is so coincidental. And as Matt said, we've already set up that Varric has a casual relationship with the truth, and a desire to dramatize.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I always wonder when we get to that moment and it's like, Varric, did you build your own dramatic moment and like tell this guy to pick Hawk's pocket just so you could swoop in?
Yeah, I don't know if he would have been as brazen as to just tell the guy, because then we'd be setting it up for the guy to go, but you said. But I definitely think that he allowed people to know that Hawk would be there with money. You know, like I definitely feel like that's the kind of thing he would do. Regardless, Bartrand is not being tractable, Varric has all sorts of ideas on how they can convince him. And what they basically need to do is rustle up enough gold to become full partners in the expedition, getting an equal share in anything it brings up. Hawk points out, if I had that kind of gold, I wouldn't be talking to you two. I would be done already. And Varric's point is, no, man, you're thinking that 100 gold is a lot. I'm telling you that this could come out way more than that. You need to be thinking big. This is not a couple hundred golds worth of. This is much, 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 much bigger. So they make a kind of common cause, and they begin. Go ahead.
One thing is that, we've introduced Hawk at the very beginning as the champion of Kirkwall. Hawk at this point, very much not a champion of Kirkwall. Hawk is still trying to not a champion of anything. He's just trying to get by, trying to make his fortune. Kirkwall is not a great place. It's not a place where someone's going to reach out and help you. You've got to help yourself to just hang on there.
Mm-hmm. And also there's a whole lot of anti-Ferelden, I want to say racism, but that's not quite right, bigotry, because the Fereldans came as refugees. And how many times have we seen what happens when people come to another place as refugees, how quickly people turn on them? In this game, it's very much a big part of it. There's even a part where, as you are searching for one of Varric's rumors that he's looking into is that there is a mage in Kirkwall who has maps of the deep roads.
A warden.
And, a former, or they say former Grey Warden, but as Hawk points out, you don't get to leave. It's not like you can quit to be Grey Wardens. And he goes, well, whatever. They go down to find him. One of the stops they make on the way is a Ferelden woman who is running kind of a charity. And as they're leaving the place, they get accosted by a group of Fereldans who are like, hey, you leave that guy alone. We won't let you run him out. And either Hawk's sibling or Hawk themselves can say, look, I am a Ferelden, okay? I am not going to run anybody out. I need to talk to him. And then they're like, oh, you're a Ferelden. And that's different. Make her bless the rule of our Queen Enora or our King Alistair, or both of them, depending on previous games. This is one of the things I find really interesting with this game, is that it sets up this idea of Kirkwall is almost like a proto-Night City from Cyberpunk, in that it is a place, not only is it a place that's terrible, it's a place where like literally trying to do the right thing and help people can often absolutely mess everything up.
Mm-hmm.
We get to lots of examples. One of them is when you go and recruit the mage, whose name is Anders, and you last saw him in Dragon Age Origins Awakenings, which means when we do that one next time, we're going to be talking about the character from this, and you're going to be like, that doesn't sound like the same guy at all. And that's because it's not. Yep. He is not the same. Do you want to talk about him, Liz?
Talk about Anders? Oh boy. Anders is, if you played Origins, he's kind of a soft boy. He loves kittens, and that's kind of his whole persona. And you go into Dragon Age 2, probably bad things have happened to him, and he's come to help the refugees here. Anders has encountered a spirit of justice and merged with it. And in Dragon Age, there's a lot of talk about spirits and a lot of talk about demons more specifically. And Anders, as the host of this spirit, has some interesting opinions in that he thinks he has merged with this good spirit, and in doing so has corrupted it, that now it is a spirit of vengeance rather than justice. And Anders is very interested in the conflict between the mages and Templars in Kirkwall. It seems that the Knight Commander Meredith in town is extremely harsh on the mages. The mages are kept in a place called the Gallows, which used to be a place where the ancient Teventers brought slaves in through Kirkwall. It's not a pleasant place. But that is where the mages of the city are imprisoned. And throughout the game, you see Meredith getting harsher and harsher with them. Anders very much believes in freedom for mages. That is his cause in this game.
Yeah, I think just to give you guys an idea of the kind of rapscallions you pick up in this first act, Aveline, you know already. She was the person you met in the wilds and came to Kirkwall with when her husband died. She's now a part of the city guard, and the quest she has for you involve interacting with the city guard and corruption in same. That's the stuff she's doing. For other characters, one of them is a elven, and I should know his name. My God, Fenris. His name is Fenris. He's an elf from Teventer who was experimented on by his master, who was a mage, who basically used lyrium to tattoo him. And the lyrium tattoos on his body give him the ability to effectively just move through solid matter.
For those at home, explain if they don't know, maybe they're coming into this late, would you want to explain what lyrium is?
Okay, yeah, quick sidebar. Imagine if this was a role-playing game source book, there'd be a little box going, "What is lyrium?" Lyrium is a lot of things. We don't specifically at this time, we don't know the origins of lyrium, although we're going to learn them in Inquisition. So I'll tell you that one quick. There's entities that live inside the world of Thedas that are like gigantic living organisms, and their blood is lyrium. And lyrium is essentially like raw magic. It's like pure, concentrated magical power. Some people describe it as like a song made into a physical thing. Others describe it as like magic, literally, that you can drink. It's actually originally found in a powdery form. It's actually when you see a liquid version of it, they took the powder and suspended it in a liquid for you to imbibe it.
Lyrium is very toxic. Only dwarves can safely mine it. I mean, You can't just grab a chunk of lyrium and hang on to it. It will kill you.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons the dwarves can do this is because they are resistant to magic. Mm-hmm. And magic is the thing that the lyrium is killing you with. Templars who ingest lyrium gain various abilities to dampen or suppress magic, but in the process they become highly addicted to it. And therefore, if you kick them out and cut them off from lyrium, they very quickly degenerate into people who will live on the docks and just be like desperately begging anyone they can for any kind of help so that they can get more lyrium. And you meet Samson in this game, and that's one of them. So lyrium. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and another note is that lyrium does also exist in the Fade. It is a cross-dimensional sort of element. But one thing that I think is interesting about it is, and Justice actually talks about this a little bit in the game as well, that, there's a song or a sound that's associated with it, and some call it the Maker's Call, some call it just the song, but it only has that when it's on our plane. If you're in the Fade, it doesn't have a song. It's not necessarily inert, but because the Fade is such a interestingly different place, it doesn't have that same resonant quality, so spirits don't get to hear music, which I thought was an interesting little thing if you have a discussion with Justice that he brings up. Or they
and
bring
also,
up.
if you talk to Cade even talks about, in Inquisition, Cade will talk about the way that the red lyrium is a different song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's, But to get back to Fenris, lyrium is the stuff that was tattooed on his body. He then gains the ability to move through solid matter, so he
Let me jump in with one little thing, which may or may not relate into this, is that in Inquisition, one of the things that Bianca says to you is that she thinks lyrium is alive. Lyrium is a living thing. And we've talked about it being the blood of these ancient titans, but it is still alive and a living thing. And the red lyrium that we first encounter in Dragon Age 2 is lyrium that has contracted the blight.
Yes, which
only living things can get the blight.
Yep. And that's an interesting little quirk that we'll talk about later. But getting back to Fenris, he basically ran away from his master. Once he realized what he could do, he was like, well, I got these tattoos so that I could serve your will, although I don't remember that. But now that I've gotten them and I have these powers, I'm out. and he runs away and hides in the island on the island of Secheron, which is currently at war between the Qunari and the Tevinter. They're fighting on Secheron for control of it. The native people of Secheron have a resistance group called the Fog Warriors that are fighting both of them. They want them both out of Secheron to free their country from the occupation of both sides. When Fenris gets to Kirkwall, he's running from his own actions, and this is a common theme. You're going to hear this again and again. But he basically sets things up so that Hawk will be tipped off that there's a lot of money in a house down by the arbor. You go in, there's no money, and you get jumped by these bandits. Then you get jumped by the Tevinder slavers. Because you are Hawk, you kill literally all of them in a whirlwind of death that nobody could possibly have foreseen. The game's really good at establishing, and granted, again, I'm sure that Varric is playing it up to a degree, but the game is really good at establishing that Hawk is an absolute gore machine. You do not want to be on the other side of Hawk. It is kind of almost charming how incredibly dangerous this person is.
And also,
go ahead.
It plays up the gore, and after you have been in a fight, you are absolutely covered in blood. There will be blood splattered on your face, and you'll go into conversations that can be very serious, and you are just like dripping in blood. And you kind of think, okay, the guy on the other side of this conversation should be backing away from you and doing whatever you've asked. But they don't.
They act like it's completely normal because Kirkwall. But that's how you end up meeting Fenris. Fenris recruits you to help him fight his master. You go to the house the master's supposedly in, but he's already fled. So Fenris is like, fine, I'll just take the house. He'll come back sooner or later. And so that's how you recruit Fenris. You recruit Merrill by going to do the favor for the Witch of the Wilds. You take the locket to the Dalish camp. The Dalish matron, the one who's in charge, is like, okay, yeah, we owe her, so you can do this, but you have to do something for me. You have to take Merrill with you. She wants to leave, and I don't want her to have to leave and be alone. So you take her and make sure she's safe. And you're like, okay. I
don't know that it's presented quite that kindly, but
she presents it that kindly. The others don't. But when you find Merrill, the first thing you find out from Merrill, who is a mage, is that she was actually in Origins if you played as a Dalish elf. She was actually in the Warden's clan. Mahariel, who is if you play the Grey Warden in Origins as a Dalish elf, your name is Mahariel, and you are one of the people from this specific Dalish clan. Anyway, Merrill is like, yeah, I disagree with the keeper about some things, and I'm leaving. And so as you get up there at one point, if you bring Fenris or Anders, this is hilarious. She'll do something, and one of the two will be like, that's blood magic. And she'll be like, yeah, what magic is magic. It doesn't matter where you get the power for it from. And they disagree strongly. My favorite part is Fenris at this point goes, oh, hey, don't mind that tiger. It's not its fault it's going to eat you. Which is just, it's a perfect representation of Fenris's relationship to every mage he meets. He thinks they're all tigers going to eat him, but he really thinks that about blood mage.
And there's an interesting thing. Merrill is using blood magic. If Bethany's with you, she talks about you called something here. You called a spirit here to open this path. And Merrill says she knows what she's doing. And Merrill and Anders have a constant bickering about her use of blood magic and her kind of casual calling of spirits.
Versus his having the spirit of justice inside himself.
Yes,
and
yes.
There's a really good moment. Go ahead.
Anders feels like he's justified in this, which maybe that's something right in the name. Yeah, but there's later in the game, they have a conversation, and Merrill says, I always knew that all spirits were dangerous. I'm sorry that you didn't, because Anders took this spirit into himself thinking, oh, this is a good spirit, not a bad spirit that's going to be a demon. And Merrill has the point, they're all potentially dangerous. You don't mix these things, and you have to be aware that they are all potentially dangerous.
Yeah. Ironically, Merrill probably agrees more with Fenris on this than either of them is. Like, it's a tiger. Maybe the tiger will let you rub its belly. Maybe the tiger will help you out, or maybe the tiger will kill you. It's a tiger. Like, all spirits are dangerous. It's a really brilliant moment. But with Meryl, you get to the top, not the top. You don't actually do this at the top. You're about halfway to the top when you find an old altar. Meryl speaks the words of the ritual. The locket flares up, and there's Flemeth in her first. Well, I don't know. Want to say first because she's in the prologue, but the first time that any player would, this is when Varric would have seen her.
Mm-hmm.
So there she is. She explains some things incredibly cryptically. One of my favorite lines, though, is he's like, "You should teach me to turn to a dragon. That looks useful." And she laughs and he goes, "If only a clever tongue was what you needed." And it's just, she does make a point that Hawk is going to do not necessarily good things, but world-shaking things. And that turns out to absolutely be the case. Without Hawk, a lot of things that we see in Inquisition and Veilguard would never have happened. So that's Meryl. That's how you get to Meryl. You bring Meryl back to Kirkwall. You and Anders sort of have a uneasy friendship, depending on choices you make. Anders is really eager to fall in love with you in the game. It's very hard to avoid Anders falling in love with you.
It's interesting, this game, because BioWare games all have romances, of course. That's a big part of them. But in this game, there's no question of gender. There's not even really a question of whether you like each other, because you can have a romance that is based on you being very friendly with someone, or you could have a romance based on totally hating someone. You can be either end of that kind of spectrum and still have a relationship. So
you can be frenemies, like, if you want to use that term.
Yeah. And so some of the relationships are really interesting. And I think in all BioWare games, the characters are what makes the game most interesting.
Yeah.
So
now basically we've talked about everybody except we didn't talk about Isabel yet, because she isn't really a member until like late in Act 1. And you don't really find out anything about her until Act 2. But she's a pirate. She was in Origins. She's kind of fun because she's kind of the stereotype of the... She is
a very Jack Sparrow before there was a Jack Sparrow.
And there's one point where someone's like, someone says to her, I think it's Meryl actually says, "How is it you sleep with all these people?" And she's like, I ask. And it's like, it's not like they all say yes. I've been told, "Get away from me, pirate hag," more times than I can count. And she just makes the point. It's just, I put myself out there. So, you miss 100% of the throws you don't make, So she's like a really interesting character. She's got a lot of stuff behind the surface, which you will find out about. They all do, but Isabel is one of the ones that really does. Isabel almost encourages people to treat her poorly. Mm-hmm. Like one of her strongest relationships is with Aveline, who seems to despise her for like most of the game. Like, the only time you start to catch that Aveline does not actually hate Isabel is when Isabel is about to be kidnapped in Act 2, and Aveline's like, "Oh no, you don't! You're not taking her. Anyone's gonna kick her around. It's me." And you're like, "Whoa, okay." So the relationships between these various characters, between Varric and everybody, between Hawk and everybody, between like Sebastian, who is this really, really super religious guy, member of the Chantry, who had decided he had to renounce his vows because his entire family has been murdered, leaving him the only true heir to the princedom of Starkhaven, the city he's from. And he's like, technically speaking, he's a DLC character.
Yeah.
But I don't know anybody who doesn't have him. Like, just everybody. Everybody got him. A
pre-order bonus or something. There was some... Yeah, he was not like... Which is good because he's a little boring.
He's very boring.
Tiny bit.
Compared to... Although he isn't entirely boring. One of the things that I remember my wife commenting on that I've always thought was interesting was that here's a character who is incredibly religious.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely devoted to it. And doesn't judge you ever.
Mm-hmm.
Like Hawk, you can be in a relationship with Sebastian. It will be one where he won't have sex because he's upfront with saying, "Look, we're not married, and I've taken orders. I can't be with you like that, but I can still love you." And you can go with that if you want to, or you can be like, "Look, I require some boot knocking," and he will be understanding. He'll be like, "I understand. This isn't for everybody." There's no judgmental from him ever until the very end, and the thing he's judgmental about, you can understand, if not necessarily support. But yeah, Sebastian is Varric's white whale. Varric can't stop trying to break him. Like he tries to break him for like 10 years. And that's the other thing I love about this story is the fact that it takes place over a 10-year period.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we should probably, Liz, you might want to start doing this. We probably should get into the actual Deep Roads moment.
Yes. So Hawk does eventually manage to make enough money to buy his way into this expedition, which was a terrible idea. Everything in this game is terrible. That's it. So they go down into the Deep Roads with Bartram and Varric and whichever companions you take along. The companions you take along will have potential impacts on the story. You go into the Deep Roads, you search and you search, you're looking for treasure. Everyone here is trying to make their fortune. Bartrand spends this entire time being an ass to everyone, yelling and ordering people around. You eventually find your way through to this ancient, forgotten Tig, and you find this idol, this red idol that Bartrand comes in and scoops up, and he's like mesmerized by it. He walks out the door and closes it behind you, locking you in this room in the Deep Roads.
With his brother.
With his brother. They're not besties, and this is... So yes, you have to fight your way back out of the Deep Roads. When you get back to Kirkwall, Bartrand is long gone. He's sold off the idol, everything, and you're just like, okay, well, I'm lucky to be alive. We grabbed some piles of gold on our way out, and I'm doing okay, but not super great.
Well, and I want to throw in here real fast, just to throw in the some of the story changes, like depending on who you bring. If you bring neither Anders nor your sibling, then it's just a straight run through the Deep Roads trying to get out. You'll find the treasury of an ancient dwarven city, and basically Varric will be like, yeah, we're gonna be even richer than Bartrand with that stupid idol, and that's what it is. If you bring one of your siblings but not Anders, they contract the blight and die.
Mm-hmm. They get attacked by a darkspawn, and
because there's
fighting a lot of darkspawn.
Yeah, you are fighting a lot of darkspawn down there. So yeah, they contract the blight and die. If you bring both Anders and your sibling, then Anders will recognize the blight, because he's a Grey Warden, he can sense it, and he's like, I stole those maps to find out what a group of Grey Wardens wanted in Kirkwall, and they should be down here somewhere. And he will lead you to the Grey Wardens. Depending on choices made in the first game, the Wardens could be led by either Alistair or Loghain, but they probably won't be. They'll probably be led by another Warden from Orlais named Stroud. Either way, though, he basically says, look, you got to take this person. They're a great warrior / magician, and they can help you, and they can survive if you do it. And he's like, this isn't a mercy. If I do this person's life will be changed forever. And I think Hawk's exact phrase is something like, it'll be a life, and so they do. Your sibling is then taken and becomes a Grey Warden.
Of course, Wardens are sort of immune to the blight, so that's kind of why you're doing this as a cure, but becoming a Warden, the ritual to join the Wardens, can also be deadly. So this is a gamble. Even now, you don't even know if your sibling survived for some amount of time.
It takes a while before you find out. But if you don't, now remember, if you haven't done any of that, you didn't bring your sibling at all, or you left them home, when you get back, either if you're a mage, your brother essentially buys you a way out of being suspected of being a mage for a while by joining the Templars. Although he doesn't do it for you. He's very upfront with it. He's doing it for himself. He wants to get out from under your shadow. But that's what happens if you're a mage. If you are a warrior or rogue, Bethany is taken to the circle against her will, but she's like, there's no point in fighting. This is where mages go. Mages go to the gallows. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of hiding. So
it really stresses that it is a hard life to be a mage. I mean, throughout the first game, you do hear, mages are kept in circles. It's bad. And but here you really experience it. And particularly if you choose to be a rogue or a warrior so that your companion, your sibling is Bethany, you really see how she has suffered, how she's kind of strained under this life where she has to hide all the time and avoid all the Templars and stay under everyone's radar. So
Yeah, in a way,
it feels
getting
very
caught for her
personal.
in a way, getting caught for her is almost a relief. It's not that she wanted to get caught, but getting caught means she doesn't have to hide from them. It does mean she has to live on the gallows, which is its own horrible thing. But it's trading. The potential that things might get better is at least there. But that's the end of Act 1. You lose. So no matter what happens, you lose somebody. You lose your sibling who's important to you, either to death, to the Grey Wardens, or to one of the two opposing factions in Kirkwall. Your mother is, of course, broken. If your sibling dies, your mother just collapses in a heap. If your sibling leaves, if it's Carver, she doesn't collapse. She just kind of stands there and looks confused. But if it's Bethany again, she collapses because Bethany is being taken to the gallows. Then they cut to 3 years later, and you're not the champion of Kirkwall yet. And I honestly feel like they almost have a "you're not the champion of Kirkwall" timer going at some points. But you are notable now. You were rich enough to buy a manse, and not just any manse, the Amell manse, which is your mother's family. The noble house in Kirkwall that your mother was a part of is the Amell line. And again, for fans of Dragon Age Origins, if you played a human mage, your surname is Amell because you are a cousin who was taken by the mages and put in a circle. I don't know why the circle they were put in is in Ferelden. It's quite possible they may have been caught attempting to escape and get put into a circle there. We don't really know, but we do know that that's the mage you play. If you play a human mage in Origins, is Hawk's cousin. So that's another thing, another little connection that they put in, which I always thought was kind of cool. But do you either of you want to talk about Act 2? Because Act 2 is where the whole mage thing starts to really wind up.
I'm going to say you guys can keep going.
So in Act 2, I feel Act 2 is mostly about the Kunari. The Kunari have come to Kirkwall, and they have stayed there. They came, their ship was wrecked, and they were at the city, and they've been saying, yeah, we're waiting for our ship to come back, a ship to pick us up, but they've just been sitting in Kirkwall. They've just been sitting, and there are a lot of tensions. The Kunari they're very different, and the Kunari have been sitting. They aren't happy to be here either, but you find out that they are waiting they need to recover a relic. They need to recover this relic in order to go home. They can't return to Parvalan without it. So they sit and they wait and they I hope to retrieve this thing.
Yep.
And of course Hawk being Hawk gets into the middle of it. Gets into the middle of talks with the Arishok, who is the leader of the Kunari here. And you do find out that this relic, actually, it's something Isabella stole.
The Tome of Kozlin, it's called. It's the writings of the original philosopher who came up with the Kyun. It's like the Quran, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So yes, you do become rather entangled in this. I'm pretty sure this was all in Act 2. Am I right, Matt?
Yeah, this is all Act 2. Basically, what happens for Act 2, to break it down really fast, Hawk is now rich and powerful. Hawk is asked by the head of Kirkwall, I forget his name.
The Viscount.
The Viscount of Kirkwall, to speak to the Kunari and try to defuse the situation. You go there, and he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know anything about this. And you're like, okay, some of your people went to the palace to talk to the Viscount? He's like, yeah, I thought it was worth a shot, but then, obviously nothing came of it. And you're like, yeah, I should probably not tell you this, but I'm gonna. Your people got kidnapped. And he's like, if anyone else had told me this, they'd be dead right now. But I'm starting to respect you, so I'm going to let you try and solve this. You go, you find the Kunari, you find out that a member of the Chantry and her pet Templar are the ones behind all this, and she gets away, and the Kunari get killed. So you're like, okay, not good. You go back, you talk to the Viscount. He's like, well, my son has been kidnapped. Please go save him. You go find him. I think the order might be reversed, but these two.
Yeah, I think the order is definitely reversed.
But you go and you find the kid, and he's like, I wasn't kidnapped. The Kunari's my friend. These guys that my father hired murdered my friend. And they're like, shut up or I'll cut your tongue out. So you're like, okay, I don't think that's going to happen. So back up. And they're like, kill them. And you're like, all right.
Yeah, that happens a lot to Hawk.
Yeah, cue Hawk turning these people into chum. You then take the kid back to his dad. The kid immediately gives his dad sass. and later runs off to be part of the Qun. He wants to join the Qunari and be a member of the Qun.
I mean, it's very interesting. These little moments Hawk has a role in really sum up the entire thing. The Qunari have a very different religious order than the average person, the average Andrastian in the Three Marches.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people find their faith, the Qun, in which everyone has a role and a place. Everyone is cared for, but they also have to stay in their place. They have a role. Some people find that a reassuring certainty.
And others find it stifling.
Yeah, exactly. So
there are actually, in addition to people who join the Qun and like take on the title of Vidithari from the Qun, there are people who are Qunari who have left the Qun. Mm-hmm. And they just kind of wander around doing whatever. And they're called Vishath or Tal Vashath. And that again, you saw in Inquisition because you could play as one of them.
Mm-hmm. It really comes to a head over two criminals that the Qunari have taken in. They have come to the Qunari and said they're converting, they want to follow the Qun, and Aveline asks you to go. You have to go convince the Arishok to let these people go. You have to do something about this. And Hawk goes, and it's like the Arishok has been here for, 3 years, 6 years at this point? Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to be here. He wants to get the Tomb of Kazlan back, but they haven't been able to.
So if this point, I think the exact line is, I can find the tome more easily by sifting through rubble. Like he's like, I'll just destroy the whole freaking city and then look for the tome in the ashes.
But it's not quite that. Like he has.
That's what he says. I'm not saying he does it. That's just he's angry at this point.
But part of the reason he does what he does is that he says he can no longer sit here and look at the injustices in Kirkwall and just wait it out.
I cannot. I cannot. I can no longer stand here and watch the dysfunction.
Yeah, because the two criminals that Aveline wants to be released to the guards of Kirkwall were actually, they killed a guard because he had brutalized their sister. Mm-hmm. And of course the guard never did anything about it. They tried to report it to the guard and the guard brushed them off. And so you see where the Arishok is saying, you can't have these. They are Vidithari. They have joined us. They are one of us now. You cannot have them. And I can no longer overlook the dysfunction in your society that makes people suffer, where people don't have a role. And yes, they throw you out of their compound.
Hold on. I got to put this part in because this is, again, some of the best storytelling in the whole thing. You have options of what you can say here, but one of my favorite options is when he asks Hawk, what would you do? Hawk can respond, I wouldn't give him back. And Aveline's like, Hawk! And he's like, you see. And then he's talking to Hawk some more. And he does that whole thing. He goes, how can you live with this chaos? And Hawk's like, I like it. Chaos means opportunity. I would have no role in your society. You'd want me to make bread or something. That's not me. That's an absolute waste of me and my talents. Like, I like opportunity. I like the chaos because it means I have something I can rise through. And it's just this brilliant moment of each of them completely doesn't understand the other at all, but they recognize that they don't understand each other. It's just really good writing because the Arishok is an antagonist, but the Arishok is never a mindless antagonist. And he's not doing anything that he does out of hatred, although he is really angry. We forgot to mention, by the way, that the Viscount's son is murdered after he becomes Vidithari by the Templar and the Chantry sister. I think the Templar's already dead by that point, but the Chantry sister
the Templar is dead. Basically, the Chantry has sent him. He has joined the Qun, but the Chantry sister has sent him a letter posing as his father to come and meet him in the Chantry and talk. At which point she had him killed because her entire motivation is that she wants to throw the Qunari out. She wants to start a fight with the Qunari. And if a member of the faithful was killed coming to the church to repent his interest in the Qun, the people would have to rise up. But she's only adding to the chaos. You see this a lot, that people they're focused on their own goals and they're just really messing things up.
But that's like a theme, right? That's a theme that runs current or through all of Dragon Age.
It's a motif.
Yeah, like
this is a straight up motif here. This is like a trill in a song. Yep, that's Loghain in the first game to a T. That's exactly what that is. I really, basically, we're gonna just skip to Hawk fights their way through the city to try and stop the Qunari from getting to the Viscount's palace and doing bad stuff. Runs into Meredith, which is your first introduction to Meredith. The first time you meet Meredith is when you're fighting, and then a Sarabas mage hits you and you're not paying attention, and then she uses her Templar abilities to shut him down and kill him. So now you've met her and she's met you, and the two of you are like kind of bantering a little bit. But I should
say at this point we kind of missed the part that the Qunari are rampaging through the city, burning and killing everything.
Yeah, they're fighting their way to the Viscount Palace to fix this.
Cleansing, yes.
They believe they're cleansing. They're course correcting.
Yes, they're very focused. Again, they aren't angry. They aren't. They're just. It's like they see this place of disorder, of chaos, and they are going to impose the Qun. They're going to impose order on this place.
Oh, and by the way, right around this time, while this is all going down. Just before they go rioting, Isabella finally confesses to you that she didn't just get shipwrecked in Kirkwall. She was running from the Qunari with their book.
Yeah, the tome of Coslin.
Yeah, the tome of Coslin, which she hid, and which is now like all these different groups are trying to get it. And you can help her, or you can tell her, no, I'm not helping you. This is crazy. If you help her get the book back, she then runs off with it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got a good relationship with her up to that point, you don't have to have romanced her, by the way, because I tested this. But if you've got a good relationship with her, if she thinks of you as an actual friend, she will come back. If not, she's gone. Like she just left, and that's it. But
I was gonna say there are two options here, and it's sort of a moment where like it's interesting because you have two ways that you can play this out, but it basically always ends with the same thing happening. Which was odd for the decision because it feels kind of weighty because you can either defend Isabella with like, you can essentially why can't I think of the Arashock? You can duel the Arashock in 1v1 combat, right? And if you win, everything they go away. They leave the city. Meredith shows up and you're named the champion of Kirkwall. Or you could attack everybody, and if you win, the remaining Qunari leave, and Meredith shows up and you're named the champion of Kirkwall. Or if you hand Isabella over, I think they also leave, and you're named the champion of Kirkwall. So like, it's a weird thing where there are three very distinct different paths you can take to finish sort of the Act 2, and then but it all ends with that same thing, which again could be a Varric thing. Go ahead.
It does have differences in that if you do turn her over or she runs away, you never see her again. If she runs away with the book and doesn't come back, she's gone. She's not in the game anymore. If you turn her over to the Qunari, she escapes them but never comes back, and you never see her again. The only way you get to see her again is either by defending her, or the only way you get to see her again is if you defend her there. And it's really funny is the Qunari, especially the Arashock, won't let her fight on her own behalf, not because she's not capable of it, because they don't respect her. She doesn't have any honor in their opinion. You're called, Basilit An. That's a title you're given by the Qunari, and it literally means non-Qunari who's still almost good enough to be Qunari. And it literally means boss means thing, but the Alit An means more than. So it's like they're saying you're a thing, but you're not. You have a potentiality of honor.
Godless.
They also call all non-Qunari boss. They just so that's your Qunari or your boss. You're a thing.
Yeah, like Sarabas means dangerous thing.
Which in Sarabas are mages in Qunari.
That's why they're dangerous things.
All right,
they're dangerous things.
Let's move on to Act 3. Go through that real quick, and then we can talk about the prologue and take us out of here. So I'll kick it over to Matt to start that, if you don't mind.
Okay, trying to go for a speed round here because we are kind of running out of time. Act 3, you go kill a high dragon and get a really cool magical suit of armor that you see yourself wearing in various flashbacks before this point. You go and get a couple of DLC you probably are doing now. One of them means you go and fight a gigantic evil mage named Corypheus. Remember him, he's in Inquisition. He's very similar to the architect from Awakenings. You go and fight him, And it turns out that your dad, one of the reasons your dad was able to escape Kirkwall was because the Grey Wardens needed somebody to do a blood magic ritual, and he does one for them. Boom, that's how you got away. Then you get back to town. Go ahead, Liz. I'm sorry.
In the DLC with Corypheus Legacy, you actually learn a lot of the things you will eventually find later in Dragon Age Inquisition. That Corypheus is influencing the mind of wardens, that he is a Teventer Magister who possibly tried to assault the Golden City and failed, that he is a Darkspawn with control over wardens. You find all of this out right there.
If you kill him, there's a warden nearby, he can just pop into the warden.
Which is also something you only find out much, much later in Dragon Age Inquisition. You only see that for sure. You don't know that in Dragon Age 2. You're just like, I killed him, he's dead, good, let's call it a day.
Yeah, although there's the person you're talking to at the end gets all shifty and talks weird, and you're like, wait, what's going on? But
he was shifty from the start. He was always pretty shifty and dark spawny.
Even if it's Janica. Even Janica changes her way. But getting back to it, when Hawke gets back to the city, depending on the relationship they have with various people, they can be recruited into a series of missions to help Anders out, or they can be like, I'm not doing that, it sounds sketchy. They can find out that their sibling is either a Templar or a mage involved in the arguments between those factions, or that their sibling is a Grey Warden. Your mother got killed in Act 2 by a blood mage. It's important, but it doesn't really have a narrative part of that. But she's gone. So basically, at this point, you are living alone in a house with Bodan Ferric and his son Sandal, which we talked about, I believe, for the Inquisition. They tell you they're going to Orlais, and so you're going to be alone unless you have somebody you're in a relationship with living in your house, which you might. There's multiple options for that, including Fenris, Isabella, Merrill, and Anders can all be people who live in your house and you have a relationship with. You can't romance Varric. I'm sorry. You get to the final fight, essentially, when Meredith finds out because Anders blows up the Chantry. The thing that Anders asked you to help him do was ultimately not curing himself of the bond he has with Justice, like he told you.
He was very shifty.
Yeah, he tells you, I've realized that the binding with Justice was wrong. I need to separate myself and him. I need these magical rituals, one of which is Sol Petre. So if you know anything about Saltpeter, you're like, wait a minute, why am I getting this in manure again?
Yeah.
Because that's exactly what happens. He makes a magical truck bomb, hides it in the Chantry, and then blows up the Chantry, which means he just killed like one of the few people in Kirkwall who doesn't want war and is relatively nice to the mages.
Yeah, Grand Cleric Elthina has been trying to step in and keep the peace between Meredith and the Grand Enchanter here, who is Orsino, because they've been at each other's throats. Meredith keeps crushing down on mages, demanding more from them, putting in more restrictions, and mages...
I was going to say, the interesting thing about this is before the Chantry blows up, there is an exchange with a classic character, because one of the Chantry people that you interact with is an agent known as Sister Nightingale, who over the course of it you find out that is actually Liliana from the first game, who gives the tidings that war is coming to Kirkwall. War is coming to Kirkwall is no longer safe.
Divine Justinia is getting tired of this, and she's thinking about Exalted Marching. Yeah. Which, as soon as she says this, and you tell this to Elthina, Elthina's like, I can't leave. You think that the Exalted March is going to just come through here and nobody innocent's going to get hurt?
Yeah,
I got to try even harder.
And then the Chantry blows up. Right, like that's the big set piece that happens directly after that. And
there's all sorts of interesting things here in that you have various alliances that you've made. Some of those people can turn on you here. First off, you have to decide: do I kill Anders, who's been really a faithful, loyal ally, but who just blew up the Chantry? Go ahead, Liz.
I think we have to speak a little to Anders' motivations, which is he says that there cannot be peace between Templars and mages. There can be no reconciliation with the terrible treatment mages have. And you're kind of looking at him here, and he's like, you just blew up the Chantry. You didn't kill a single Templar, probably. You just killed a lot of innocent people in the Chantry, plus the only woman who was going to try to make peace and protect Kirkwall. And it's just he wanted to make a point that there's no reconciliation. He wanted this fight, as he... Mm-hmm. No, even as he's thrown the mages of Kirkwall to their deaths. He's thrown the Templars of Kirkwall to their deaths.
The thing. Like, one of the things about it too is interesting is that Anders is coming from the mindset that you can't, sometimes there's no negotiation. That all the attempts at negotiating a peace have done is let Meredith continue to do horrible things and get away with it.
Yeah.
And he makes the point that what happened to Carl, where they branded him, even though he'd passed his harrowing, which is a thing. Mages in this setting have to go through a thing called the harrowing, which is they're taken into the Fade and they experience temptation and they have to resist it and say no. If they don't, if they become an abomination instead, they're put to death. But once you've done the harrowing, if you fail the harrowing but you don't get possessed and turned into an abomination, they brand you with a mark on your forehead that turns you into like I forget what they're called, like quiets or something.
Tranquil.
Tranquil, thank you.
You're cut off. Cut off from the Fade. You no longer have any emotion. You are just a shell.
You're a magic eunuch.
At the time, they didn't know there was a cure. And there's actually a really interesting bit in this where when Anders flares up into the full justice, manifestation, Carl is briefly cured. And then he's like, no, I can feel it fading. The reason he's only briefly cured is that it wasn't long enough. You find out later, Cassandra was made tranquil. All members of the Inquisition are made tranquil.
Yeah.
And then
the Seekers of Truth.
Yeah.
The Seekers of Truth.
Seekers of Truth. So that is the order she was in. All of them are made tranquil and then cured in order that they understand the relationship between the Fade and living beings.
Now,
and so this whole thing, we come back to Anders basically blows everything up because he thinks there's only thing that will happen if they keep negotiating is mages will stay in chains because nobody will back down from that.
And he's not necessarily wrong either, right? Like,
no, he has a point. It's just that it's clear that he has gone past the point where he can do any kind of calculus.
Well, it's not even that. I mean, it is quite honestly that he's gone from justice to vengeance, and it's a little bit too close to home. So, like, all this leads up to, and I kind of want to go into the conclusion because this is the setup for the world state that we see in Inquisition, and that we're ultimately going to see inherit like into the next game as well. So this is the story that basically concludes the Battle of Kirkwall. Everything is done. With everything that happens with Meredith, the blowing up of the Chantry.
Go ahead. Gotta let Liz talk.
We should note, Meredith. In the end, you can choose to side with the Templars are the mages and help them out, because Meredith declares the right of annulment. She's going to kill everyone in the circle because Anders has done this thing and blown up the Chantry. And you can choose to side with Meredith and say, okay, let's kill every mage in Kirkwall because one of them is a really bad guy, or you can side with the mages. Now, no matter what you do, you can try to be friends with either of them, and you will fight Orsino, who kind of desperately calls on blood magic to become some horrible corpse monster. And then you will fight Meredith, who, turns out Meredith was the one who bought the idol, the red lyrium idol from Bartrand after he came out of the Deep Roads, and had it forged into a sword, which she has been carrying with her. Red lyrium has terrible effects on people. It makes you crazy. It can make things move around. It's very unpredictable, and Meredith has been in close contact with the remains of this relic for some time.
At least 6 years at this point.
Yeah.
So you have a huge fight with Meredith where she makes the statues in the square come alive and attack you, and is just eventually, when you defeat her, she calls on, the power of the Maker to sustain her through this fight, and she is turned into red lyrium, left in this courtyard in front of the gallows. It's kind of terrifying, frankly.
It is a horrible way to potentially die.
Yes.
Because we're not even sure she dies, but to try and wrap everything up, at the end of this doesn't stay in Kirkwall. The mages outside of Kirkwall hear that the
Yeah.
Templars were about to assassinate all of them for one guy's actions, and they just rise up all over Thedas.
There's a lot there. Yeah, there's a lot of that happens. So like, and I kind of want to go through this real quick. So like the Circle of Magi is disbanded. It's no longer there, right? Like it's gone. All the circles rise up, as is the champion's entourage over time. And it actually marks the important thing here, and the thing that I want to get into is this actually marks the beginning of the Mage Templar War officially. This is the official opening silo of it.
The Templars also, like, they decide we're not going to sit and let the Chantry tell us to stand down and to try to calm this. We're going to kill them. So they break away from the Chantry as well.
And they say, now the circles have fallen. Every mage is an apostate. Apostates must die. A mage that is not under our control must die. And a huge war breaks out between these two factions, and it's devastating.
Yeah, and the at the end of it, where Cassandra is basically Varric finishes telling the story. This is all the stuff that happens afterwards. And the whole point of this is Cassandra is trying to figure out what was the spark that ignited the flame, so to speak. And Cassandra finds out through the story of this that it is the fault of Knight Commander Meredith, not Hawk. Varric agrees, but also points out that the Lyrium Idol, which wasn't exactly helpful, and Anders were just as responsible. These were two very unstable elements that came into collision. And as a result, you have your Mage Templar War. And again, it points out that the Chantry has lost control of every Circle of Magi outside of Tevinter. The Templar Order has abandoned the Chantry to fight its own war against the mages. He's also very surprised at this point to find out that the Chantry is trying to locate Hawk, believing that the champion, as someone there at the start of the war, might be able to help negotiate a peaceful resolution. And then Varric explains that he cannot, as he doesn't know where Hawk has gone. Though he is confident that Hawk is not dead, he just doesn't know where he is. Whether that's true or not, that's a whole other story, because again, Varric has a very conditional relationship with truth, right?
We learn later it's definitely true.
Correct.
Yeah.
Varric is released from Cassandra's custody. He goes outside to meet with Liliana, who we know has survived everything, and then goes over for the Seeker's next course of action. And their plan is either to find either the champion or the warden, because both of those searches have proven unsuccessful. Which, again, this is a seed that feeds into the next game that's coming out, right? Like, this is why this game there's so much story. There's a lot of stuff we didn't cover. There's so much more. We could sit here and talk about it for another hour, especially with all of the side quests, with all of the downloadable content, like the Exile Prince Legacy, Mark of the Assassin.
We didn't even get to talk about Meryl's quest line, which is very important to the ideas we encounter when we see Solus in the next game.
Yeah.
There's a ton for all of her statements to Anders, but I knew spirits are dangerous. Meryl still learns maybe you didn't know enough.
Yeah.
And there's a ton. Like, this game is one of the reasons that it's my favorite, is that there's a lot of stuff that the consequences are not escapable.
Yes.
You don't necessarily get away all the time unscathed. Sometimes things go very badly. Although there is also the fact that it can feel kind of like there's a moment in this game where you have an option to skip a lot of content to get straight to your mother who's been kidnapped by a blood mage. Even if you do that, it doesn't help. In fact, it actually makes it worse, because then the blood mage that had helped you then turns on you and Varric kills him. And you're like, so I could have just not even stopped for you and it wouldn't have mattered. So that's a weird little moment. But there's a lot of moments in this story. Like, there's the part where in Act 3, a guy basically calls you a lace-covered refugee, and you're like, I hope you enjoyed saying that, because those are the last words you're ever going to speak. It's just, the dialogue is punchy. The characters are their own people, and sometimes they'll argue with you, and you can have the relationships with people. I wouldn't say they hate you. Like, Meryl doesn't hate you when she's a rival, but she definitely does not agree with you. And that has effects on the narrative. It has effects on what happens at certain points. So a lot of that stuff I really think is important for Dragon Age because it's really something that becomes part of the story in the next game.
It does. And this is also very important to note that David Geider was still the lead writer or the head writer for this game. And after the success of Origin and the books, you can tell that this is sort of the moment where he was let loose, right? Like it was you go ahead, do what you want to do. Write your story, do your thing, make it successful. And he did, right? It's one of those things where being in control of that narrative and giving that sort of freedom, really, you can see why this game has so much into it. You can see why, in at least the case of a lore watch or from a story perspective, or as just a fan of Dragon Age story, why we glom onto it, why it's so good. And why, if you can get past some of the repetitive scenes, because of the back and forth nature of it, you get such a huge piece of world building. And it didn't just set up Dragon Age Inquisition and Dreadwolf. It also was the setup point for the role-playing game, if you happen to be playing that or had the books for it, because the role-playing game takes place after this. And like all these story elements are things that they incorporated and wouldn't have had otherwise. And it would have been a much more bland, much more different experience, even in a tabletop environment. It's a very important piece in that sort of Dragon Age ecosystem. So it's one of those things I will highly encourage you, even if you're listening to this, if you haven't played it, if you started playing it and then stopped because of that, like you maybe thought it was too repetitive, I'm going to encourage you to go back in and give it another shot. Try it, spend some time with it. I think you'll actually find quite a bit of it very, very endearing, and see why I think it is. And Matt and I believe Liz agrees with me on this one. I believe we've already stated it. It is the superior game to Origin and Inquisition, just based off of that alone. It's our favorite.
I'd say it's a better story. Absolutely.
Yeah.
To gameplay wise, Inquisition and 2 are very similar. There's not a lot of difference.
Yeah.
Origins, if you like turn-based, I'm in charge of everything my characters do play, Origins is probably a better gameplay experience for people. I don't like it. Like
we used to joke that Origins was Baldur's Gate 3 before Baldur's Gate 3 existed because it felt like a 3D version of Baldur's Gate 2.
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah.
But I definitely think this is possibly the apex of using the world in the story for the Dragon Age series.
Yeah, but I think that's going to do it for now, folks. Again, Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to our podcast, better chance of having your question answered on our podcast with the Q and an ads-free site experience. If you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, please send those in to us at podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the subject line and any special pronunciation of your name. If you want to hit us up on Discord, we have the Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is open for everybody. And if you are a Patreon subscriber, we have the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, where we tend to look for our questions first as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. But with that, folks, we'll see you next week.